In the criminal underworld of Europe, few names carry as much weight as Christy Kinahan. For over 4 decades, this Dublin-born gangster has built one of the most sophisticated drug trafficking operations in the world. His organization, known as the Kinahan Cartel, moves billions of dollars worth of cocaine and cannabis across continents. They've corrupted officials, murdered rivals, and infiltrated the highest levels of professional boxing. But Christy Kinahan has never served significant time for drug trafficking. He's never been convicted of running a criminal empire. And for years, he lived openly in Spain and Dubai, untouchable by European law enforcement. This is the story of the Dapper Don, the Irish godfather who built a billion-dollar empire and remains one of the world's most wanted men. Christopher Kinahan Senior was born in 1957 in Dublin, Ireland. He grew up in the inner city, in working-class neighborhoods where poverty was common and opportunities were scarce. Dublin in the 1960s and 70s was a city struggling with high unemployment, limited social mobility, and a growing drug problem. For young men like Christy, the straight path offered little promise. But the criminal path offered wealth, respect, and power. Christy's entry into crime came through the drug trade. By the late 1970s, heroin was flooding into Dublin, creating an addiction crisis that would scar the city for decades. Young Christy wasn't using heroin. He was selling it. He started small, dealing in his neighborhood, learning the business from older criminals who controlled the trade. But Christy was different from other street dealers. He was ambitious, intelligent, and patient. He understood that real power came not from working the streets, but from controlling the supply. Throughout the 1980s, Christy built relationships with drug suppliers in Europe and beyond. He wasn't flashy. He didn't draw attention. While other Dublin criminals were getting arrested for street-level crimes, Christy was building an infrastructure. He established connections with Dutch drug traffickers, who controlled Europe's cannabis market. He developed relationships with Colombian cocaine suppliers. He created smuggling routes through Spain and Portugal. By the time Irish police realized Christy Kinahan was a major player, he had already become untouchable. What set Christy apart was his business acumen. He treated drug trafficking like a legitimate corporation. He diversified his operations, invested in legal businesses to launder money, and built layers of insulation between himself and the street-level crimes. He employed accountants, lawyers, and logistics experts. The Kinahan organization wasn't just a gang. It was a multinational criminal enterprise, with sophisticated operations across multiple countries. By the 1990s, Christy Kinahan was one of the most powerful drug traffickers in Ireland. But Dublin was becoming too hot. Irish police had designated him a target. Rival criminals resented his growing power. And Christy recognized that to truly expand his empire, he needed to operate from somewhere with less scrutiny. In the late 1990s, Christy made a decision that would define the next phase of his criminal career. He moved to Spain. Spain, particularly the Costa del Sol, had become a haven for European criminals. The warm climate, relaxed lifestyle, and friendly banking laws attracted drug traffickers from across Europe. British, Dutch, Irish, and Russian criminals all established operations there. For Christy Kinahan, Spain offered the perfect base. He could coordinate his drug operations, meet with suppliers, launder money, and live openly without constant police harassment. Christy settled in southern Spain and began building what would become known as the Kinahan Cartel. He brought his family with him, including his sons Daniel and Christopher Jr. The Kinahan organization expanded rapidly throughout the 2000s. They established themselves as major cocaine distributors, moving tons of product from South America through Spain and into Ireland, the UK, and broader Europe. The profits were astronomical, estimated in the billions of dollars. But Christy didn't just run drugs. He invested his money wisely. The Kinahan Cartel bought properties throughout Spain, Portugal, and Dubai. They established legitimate businesses in construction, real estate, and hospitality. And in a move that would bring them international attention, they invested heavily in professional boxing. Christy and his son Daniel became prominent boxing promoters, managing fighters and organizing major events. This gave the Kinahan organization a veneer of legitimacy and access to celebrities and public figures. The boxing connection was brilliant from a criminal perspective. It allowed the Kinahans to travel internationally for fights and promotional events. It gave them opportunities to meet wealthy individuals who could be corrupted or used for money laundering. It provided a legitimate explanation for their wealth and lifestyle. And it brought them respect in communities that might otherwise have shunned drug dealers. Christy Kinahan, the heroin dealer from Dublin, was now rubbing shoulders with world champion boxers and sports celebrities. But the criminal empire came with violence. The drug trade is built on intimidation and elimination of rivals. And the Kinahan Cartel was no exception. Throughout the 2000s and 2010s, they were involved in numerous murders and attempted murders of rival criminals. They employed hitmen, both within their organization and contracted from abroad. Bodies appeared across Ireland and Spain, victims of the Kinahan organization's enforcement arm. The violence escalated dramatically in 2016 when a rival Dublin gang, the Hutch family, declared war on the Kinahan. The trigger was the murder of Gary Hutch, a criminal with connections to both organizations, who was killed in Spain in 2015. The Hutch family blamed the Kinahans and vowed revenge. What followed became known as the Kinahan-Hutch feud, one of the bloodiest gang wars in Irish history. On February 5, 2016, the feud reached a shocking climax. Gunmen dressed as police officers stormed the Regency Hotel in Dublin during a boxing win event. They were looking for Daniel Kinahan, Christy's son, who was at the event. In front of hundreds of witnesses, the gunmen opened fire, killing David Byrne, a Kinahan associate. The brazen attack in a crowded hotel shocked Ireland and brought international attention to the Kinahan organization. The Regency Hotel attack triggered a wave of retaliatory violence. Over the next several years, 18 people would be murdered in the Kinahan-Hutch feud. Christy Kinahan, operating from Spain and later Dubai, coordinated his organization's response. Hutch family members and associates were targeted. Innocent people were caught in the crossfire. Dublin became a war zone, with tit-for-tat murders happening regularly. Irish police struggled to contain the violence, and the government declared the Kinahan organization a major threat to national security. Throughout this period, Christy Kinahan remained beyond the reach of Irish law. He had left Ireland years earlier, and never returned. Spain was reluctant to extradite him, and he had no outstanding warrants, for which he could be easily arrested. The Spanish legal system moved slowly, and Christy had excellent lawyers who fought every attempt to bring charges. He lived openly in southern Spain, in luxury villas, driving expensive cars, and operating his empire with apparent impunity. But international law enforcement was building cases. The Irish Garda worked with Spanish police, Europol, and American agencies to gather evidence against the Kinahan organization. They used wiretaps, surveillance, financial investigations, and cooperating witnesses. They mapped the organization's structure, identified key members, and documented drug shipments. The goal was to build a case so comprehensive that Christy Kinahan could no longer evade justice. In 2018, Spanish police launched Operation Shovel, a major operation targeting the Kinahan Cartel. Dozens of arrests were made across Spain. Properties were seized. Bank accounts were frozen. And, while Christy Kinahan himself wasn't arrested, The operation disrupted his organization and forced him to relocate. He moved to Dubai, United Arab Emirates, where he believed he would be safer from European law enforcement. Dubai became Christy's new base of operations. The UAE has no extradition treaty with Ireland, making it an ideal refuge for wanted criminals. Christy settled into luxury life in Dubai, living in expensive apartments, driving supercars, and continuing to run his drug empire remotely. His sons Daniel and Christopher Jr. joined him there, and the Kinahan organization adapted to operating from the Middle East. But the boxing connection became a liability. As the Kinahan-Hutch feud and the Regency Hotel attack gained international media attention, boxing organizations came under pressure to sever ties with the Kinahan family. Major fighters who had been managed by Daniel Kinahan began distancing themselves. Promoters refused to work with Kinahan-connected events. The veneer of legitimacy that boxing had provided began to crumble. In 2022, the United States Department of Treasury took unprecedented action. They designated Christy Kinahan, his sons Daniel and Christopher Jr., and 4 other cartel members as significant narcotics traffickers under the Foreign Narcotics Kingpin Designation Act. This wasn't just symbolic. It meant that anyone doing business with the Kinahans could face severe penalties, including being cut off from the U.S. financial system. It effectively blacklisted the entire organization globally. The U.S. designation was devastating for the Kinahan. The Treasury Department's announcement detailed the organization's operations. Their estimated annual drug trafficking revenue of over $1 billion. Their involvement in murders, and their money laundering networks. The U.S. government offered rewards of up to $5 million each for information leading to the arrest and conviction of Christy, Daniel, and Christopher Jr. Kinahan. These were some of the largest rewards ever offered for organized crime figures. The designation had immediate effects. Businesses that had worked with Kinahan-connected entities cut ties. Banks froze accounts. Properties were seized. The boxing world completely severed connections with Daniel Kinahan. Fighters who had been managed by him publicly distanced themselves. Even in Dubai, where the Kinahans had felt safe, they found themselves increasingly isolated. Irish police ramped up their efforts. They worked with international partners to dismantle the Kinahan organization's networks. Dozens more arrests followed in Ireland, the UK, Spain, and elsewhere. Drug shipments were intercepted. Money laundering operations were exposed. The organization that Christy had built over decades was under assault from multiple directions. But Christy Kinahan himself remained free. Living in Dubai, protected by the lack of extradition treaty, he continued to evade arrest. The UAE has been criticized for harboring wanted criminals, but they've been slow to take action against high-profile figures who bring wealth into the country. Christy lived openly, occasionally photographed at restaurants or luxury hotels, seemingly unconcerned about the international manhunt. The question many people ask is, how has Christy Kinahan avoided prosecution for so long? The answer is complex. First, he's intelligent and careful. He insulates himself from direct involvement in criminal activity. Others handle the drugs, the money, the violence. Christy operates at a level where proving his involvement requires extensive investigation and often cooperating witnesses who are too afraid to testify. Second, he's invested heavily in legal defense. The Kinahan organization employs top lawyers across multiple jurisdictions. They fight every extradition request, every asset seizure, every charge. They use legal technicalities and procedural delays to slow investigations. And they've been remarkably successful at keeping Christy out of prison. Third, he's chosen his refuges carefully. Spain was slow to act because their legal system moves cautiously and requires substantial evidence. Dubai has no extradition treaty with most European countries and is reluctant to arrest wealthy residents who contribute to the economy. Christy has exploited these legal and political realities brilliantly. But his freedom may be limited. The U.S. designation has made it much harder for him to operate. His financial networks are being dismantled. His sons are also under extreme pressure, with Daniel particularly affected by being cut off from the boxing world that had become his passion. The walls are closing in, and even Dubai may eventually become untenable as international pressure mounts on the UAE to stop harboring wanted criminals. The human cost of Christy Kinahan's empire is staggering. The heroin and cocaine his organization has trafficked have destroyed countless lives. Addiction, overdoses, ruined families. Communities devastated by drug abuse. All of this traces back to traffickers like Christy. The 18 murders in the Kinahan feud alone represent families destroyed and children left without parents. And those are just the confirmed deaths directly linked to the feud. The actual body count from decades of Kinahan organization violence is likely much higher. In Ireland, Christy Kinahan is public enemy number 1. The Garda have made dismantling his organization a top priority. Politicians regularly denounce him. Media coverage has exposed his operations and the violence he's responsible for. He can never return to Ireland without being immediately arrested. His legacy in his home country is one of destruction and misery. But in criminal circles, Christy Kinahan is respected, even admired. He built a billion-dollar empire from nothing. He operated for decades without being convicted of major crimes. He adapted to changing circumstances, moving from Ireland to Spain to Dubai as needed. He infiltrated legitimate industries like boxing. He's lived a life of luxury while law enforcement struggled to stop him. Two aspiring criminals, Christy's story is aspirational, proof that with intelligence and ruthlessness, you can beat the system. This duality villain to society, success story 2, criminals defines Christy Kinahan's legacy. He represents the ultimate organized crime figure. Sophistication, wealthy, violent when necessary, and frustratingly difficult to prosecute. He's not a street thug. He's a criminal CEO, running a multinational drug trafficking corporation with branches across continents. The Kinahan organization's structure reflects Christy's business approach. At the top is Christy himself, the strategic leader who makes major decisions. His sons Daniel and Christopher Jr. serve as key lieutenants, managing different aspects of the operation. Below them are trusted associates who handle logistics, enforcement, money laundering, and distribution. And at the bottom are the street-level dealers and couriers who face the most risk and receive the smallest share of profits. This hierarchical structure, with layers of insulation between the top and bottom, makes it difficult to prosecute leaders. Even when police arrest low-level members, they can rarely provide evidence against Christy himself. The few who might have that evidence are too afraid to testify. Knowing the Kinahan organization's reputation for violence against informants and their families, the money laundering operation is equally sophisticated. The Kinahan organization uses a web of front companies, shell corporations, and real estate investments to clean their drug profits. They move money through multiple jurisdictions, making it difficult to trace. They've invested in legitimate businesses in Ireland, Spain, Portugal, Dubai, and beyond. They use professional money launderers who specialize in disguising the origins of illegal funds. By the time drug money becomes a property purchase or business investment, the connection to criminal activity is nearly impossible to prove. The boxing investment was particularly clever. Professional boxing has historically had connections to organized crime, and it's an industry where large cash transactions are common and not heavily scrutinized. By promoting fights and managing fighters, the Kinahans could move money, build legitimate reputations, and network with wealthy individuals. Daniel Kinahan became a significant figure in boxing, advising world champions and organizing major fights. Until the U.S. designation and media exposure forced him out, boxing provided perfect cover for criminal operations. The Regency Hotel attack in 2016 was a turning point. Before that, the Kinahan organization operated with relative anonymity outside Ireland. The brazen daylight shooting at a boxing event, captured on camera and witnessed by hundreds, changed everything. It brought international attention to the Kinahan-Hutch feud and, by extension, to Christy Kinahan's organization. Media investigations followed, exposing the family's operations. Law enforcement increased focus on dismantling the network. The attack that was meant to kill Daniel Kinahan instead destroyed much of the organization's carefully constructed legitimate facade. The feud with the Hutch family revealed another aspect of the Kinahan organization: their capacity for sustained violence. Over 6 years, 18 people were murdered in revenge killings and counter-revenge killings. The Kinahans used professional hitmen, sometimes importing them from abroad. They demonstrated that no one connected to their rivals was safe, targeting family members and associates, not just active criminals. This brutality was meant to send a message: crossing the Kinahans has deadly consequences. But the violence also exposed them. Each murder brought police investigations. Witnesses, even terrified ones, sometimes provided information. Forensic evidence linked killings to Kinahan associates, and international law enforcement cooperation meant that information from Irish investigations could be shared with Spanish, British, and other police forces. The feud that was meant to demonstrate Kinahan power instead accelerated their downfall. Christy's sons have become both assets and liabilities. Daniel, the eldest, inherited his father's ambition and intelligence. He became the public face of the family through boxing promotion, bringing them into legitimate circles. But his high profile also made him a target, both for rivals like the Hutches and for law enforcement. The U.S. designation specifically highlighted Daniel's role in the organization, effectively ending his boxing career. Christopher Jr., the younger son, has been more involved in the operational side, coordinating drug shipments, managing logistics, and handling the violent enforcement when necessary. He's been connected to multiple murders and attempted murders. In some ways, Christopher Jr. represents the brutal reality behind the sophisticated facade that Christy and Daniel tried to present. The 3 generations of Kinahan's Christy, his sons, and now his grandchildren, growing up in this world, represent the perpetuation of organized crime. Christy brought his sons into the business, teaching them the trade, introducing them to contacts, and grooming them to eventually take over. His grandchildren are growing up with wealth generated from drug trafficking, potentially being prepared for the same life. Breaking this cycle is one of law enforcement's challenges. The international cooperation against the Kinahans shows how modern law enforcement fights transnational organized crime. Irish Garda worked with Spanish Policia Nacional, British National Crime Agency, American D and Treasury Department, Europol, Interpol, and others. They share intelligence, coordinate operations, and use each country's legal tools to pressure the organization from multiple directions. The U.S. Kingpin designation was particularly effective because it weaponized the global financial system against the Kinahans. But organized crime adapts. As pressure increases in one area, traffickers shift to others. As one smuggling route is closed, new ones open. As law enforcement targets leadership, new leaders emerge. The Kinahan organization has shown resilience, surviving major operations like Operation Shovel and continuing to function despite numerous arrests. Whether they can survive the sustained international pressure of recent years remains to be seen. For Christy Kinahan personally, now in his late 60s, the question is how his story ends. Will he eventually be arrested and extradited to face justice? Will he die free in Dubai, having beaten the system? Will the pressure become too much, forcing him to negotiate some kind of deal? Or will he be killed by rivals, as happens to many crime bosses? These questions remain unanswered. What is certain is that Christy Kinahan has lived a life of contradictions. Massive wealth alongside constant danger, luxury villas while being hunted internationally, family loyalty in a business built on violence and betrayal, the respect of some, the hatred of many. He's been called the Dapper Don, the Irish Godfather, a criminal genius. He's also been called a drug dealer, a murderer, a destroyer of lives and communities. The communities affected by the Kinahan organization's drugs tell a different story than the one of criminal success. In Dublin's inner city, where heroin addiction remains a serious problem, the Kinahan name represents decades of exploitation. Families destroyed by addiction, children growing up in poverty while dealers grew rich. Communities plagued by violence, this is the real legacy of Christy Kinahan's empire. Law enforcement officials who've spent careers fighting the Kinahan organization describe them as among the most sophisticated criminals they've encountered. The organization's ability to operate across multiple countries, their financial sophistication, their corruption of officials, and their capacity for violence place them in the top tier of international drug trafficking organizations. Today, Christy Kinahan remains free in Dubai, though his movements are restricted by international pressure. His organization continues to operate, though significantly degraded by arrests and asset seizures. His sons face the same international manhunt. And law enforcement continues building cases, gathering evidence, applying pressure, and waiting for the opportunity to bring the Kinahan leadership to justice. The story of Christy Kinahan is not yet finished. He remains alive, free, and technically in control of his organization. But the walls are closing in. The days when he could live openly in Spain, promote boxing matches, and operate his drug empire with impunity are over. The U.S. designation changed the game. Media exposure destroyed the legitimate facade. International cooperation increased pressure. And, eventually, many believe justice will catch up with the Dapper Don of Dublin. But for now, Christy Kinahan represents one of the great frustrations of international law enforcement, a known criminal, responsible for immense harm, who remains beyond reach. His story is a testament to the challenges of fighting sophisticated and organized crime, in a globalized world where criminals can exploit jurisdictional boundaries, legal technicalities, and financial complexity to evade justice. Christy Kinahan was born in Dublin in 1957 and remains free as of 2024, living in Dubai. He is wanted internationally, subject to U.S. sanctions, and has a $5 million reward on his head. His organization continues to traffic drugs worth billions annually, despite significant law enforcement pressure. He has never been convicted of drug trafficking or leading a criminal organization, though he has served time for lesser offenses. His sons Daniel and Christopher Jr. also remain free in Dubai, wanted by multiple countries.